The planet of Arvala was once a bright jewel in the galaxy, home to the proud and ancient Frothians. Their cities stood tall, their technology was unmatched, and their culture was rich with history. But all of that had changed. Now, Arvala was a dying world, scared by natural disasters, war, and neglect. Once lush forests had turned to dust. Rivers that once flowed with crystal-clear water had dried up. The ground was cracked, and the sky was forever darkened by smoke. The Vrothians had fought valiantly to save their planet, but one by one, their attempts had failed. The Vrothians were not a weak species. They were strong, resourceful, and determined. But when the last great disaster hit, they found themselves helpless. Entire regions of their world were lost to massive earthquakes, and their once great cities were reduced to rubble. The Vrothian people, who had once prided themselves on their strength, now had nothing left to fight with. Their population had dwindled to a fraction of what it once was. Thousands of their people had died, and many more were left starving and sick. Desperate, the Vrothians reached out to other civilizations across the galaxy, hoping for help. But no one responded. The peaceful races ignored their calls, and the more aggressive species saw no value in helping a weakened race. The Vrothians had lost their power, and now they were seen as nothing more than a nuisance. The galaxy had abandoned them. Among the few remaining Vrothians, a small group of leaders gathered in the ruins of their capital city. Their faces were worn and tired, but their eyes still held a spark of determination. They gathered around a table in the center of the city's command center, an old, crumbling building that once stood as a symbol of their strength. Now it was just a place for them to discuss how to survive the final days of their civilization. "I fear it is too late," said the leader, Zorik. His voice was low, filled with sorrow. He was the last of the old guard, one of the final generals who had fought in the great wars before the planet's fall. "We have lost our allies, our homes, and our future. Even if we survive, what will we have left?" His words echoed in the empty chamber, and the others lowered their heads. There was no denying it. The Vrothians were on the brink of extinction. "We cannot give up," said Kiri, a younger leader who had risen to prominence in the wake of the disasters. She had lost her family in the last great quake and had seen the suffering of her people firsthand. But she was determined to find a way to save them, even if it seemed impossible. "There must be someone who will help us. We cannot die like this." "We have sent out every possible message," Zorik said. "We have pleaded for help from every corner of the galaxy. The only thing we've received in return is silence. We are truly alone." Kiri stood up and walked over to the large map displayed on the wall. The map showed their planet and the locations of the remaining settlements. There were only a handful of them left, scattered across the planet like islands in a sea of devastation. Most of the population had gathered in these last few places, hoping for a miracle. But no miracle was coming. As Kiri stared at the map, a sudden thought struck her. What if the Vrothians weren't the only ones in the galaxy who had experienced such a downfall? What if there were other species, other races, who had also faced extinction and had survived? Perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope. "Zorik," Kiri said, her voice sharp with new resolve, "maybe we are not alone. We've been looking for help from the peaceful races, but what if we've been looking in the wrong places? There are species out there that understand survival, who have faced the same kinds of struggles we have. Perhaps they are the ones who will help us." Zorik looked up at her, a mix of confusion and curiosity in his eyes. "You're talking about the carnivorous races?" Kiri nodded. "Yes, the ones known for their strength, their ability to survive in the harshest conditions, the ones who understand the value of tenacity and resilience. If we can prove that we have what it takes to survive, they might help us." Zorik was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing in thought. The Vrothians had always seen themselves as superior, as the masters of the galaxy. But now, with their civilization crumbling, they were no longer in a position to be proud. They needed help, no matter where it came from. "You may be right. Zorik finally said, "We have nothing left to lose. If there are carnivorous races out there, we must reach out to them. If they are willing to help us, we must prove ourselves worthy." Kiri smiled, a glimmer of hope returning to her heart. "We must send a message to them. It's our only chance." And so, the Vrothians made the decision to reach out to the one race they had once seen as a threat, the humans. The carnivorous humans, known across the galaxy for their survival instincts, their cunning, and their unrelenting nature, were the last hope for the Vrothian people. Little did the Vrothians know, their message would reach the one human fleet that had a different view of the universe, a fleet that would answer their call, but not out of pity, not out of kindness, but because they saw something in the Vrothians that no one else did. They saw potential. The Vrothians had been abandoned, but they were not yet forgotten. The message was sent. The Vrothians, with nothing left but their will to survive, had reached out to the humans, hoping for a miracle. As the days passed, the hope they had once lost began to flicker again. They waited in silence, unsure of what to expect. But deep inside, they knew they couldn't afford to sit idly by. They had to prepare, just in case someone, anyone, answered their call. The planet Arvala was dying, and the Vrothians knew time was running out. Their once grand cities were little more than shadows of what they had been. The few remaining Vrothians were scattered across the planet, living in small settlements, doing everything they could to survive. They hunted, they scavenged, and they did their best to rebuild, but nothing ever seemed to work. And so, their people waited. One day, a small group of Vrothian scouts, out on a mission to find food and supplies, noticed something in the sky. It wasn't the usual drones or space debris that had passed by in the past. This was something different, something big, something purposeful. They ran back to the settlement as quickly as their weakened bodies would allow. "Look, in the sky, a ship. A real ship," one of them shouted. The others followed his gaze, their eyes wide in disbelief. There, high above the atmosphere, was a massive human warship. The humans had responded. They had come. Back in the command center, Zorik and Kiri stood side by side, watching the ship approach their planet. The air was thick with tension. It had been so long since they had seen a true spaceship, and the idea that the humans had answered their desperate call was almost too much to process. "They are here," Kiri said, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and fear. "They are really here." Zorik nodded, but his expression was still one of caution. "I don't know what to expect. We've heard rumors of the humans, how fierce they are, how they fight without mercy. But we don't know if they're coming to help us, or to finish us off." Kiri turned to him, her eyes full of determination. "We can't think like that. They've come, and we have to show them that we are worth saving." The ship landed with a thundering roar on the outskirts of their settlement. Dust and debris flew into the air as the massive craft touched down. For a moment, the Vrothians stood frozen in awe, watching as the humans began to disembark. The first thing that stood out about them was their appearance. They weren't like the peaceful races the Vrothians had once interacted with. These humans were muscular, covered in battle armor, and had a look of readiness in their eyes. They looked like they had been through battles, and they had come out the other side stronger for it. Captain Rook, the leader of the human team, stepped forward. He was tall and imposing, his eyes scanning the Vrothians with a cold, calculating gaze. His armor gleamed in the sunlight, and at his side was a massive weapon that seemed to pulse with power. The Vrothians, unsure of what to do, remained in place. Zorik stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with a hint of nervousness. "We are the Vrothians. We have called for help. We are in need of your assistance. Will you aid us?" Captain Rook studied Zorik for a long moment. The silence between them was heavy, and it seemed as if the world itself was holding its breath. Finally, Rook spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "We came because we received your message. But let me be clear, we don't do this out of charity. We don't help those who can't help themselves." His words were sharp, and they stung more than Zorik had expected. But there was something about Rook's tone that wasn't dismissive. It was almost respectful. "What we've seen of your people, from our scans and reports, suggests that you are not helpless," Rook continued. "You are strong, you are resilient, and that's why we're here. But you will have to prove it. We don't help the weak." Zorik felt a pang of pride at Rook's words. The Vrothians were not weak. They had faced destruction and loss, but they had survived. They had the strength to rebuild, to rise again. But they needed help. And now, the humans were offering them a chance. "We will prove ourselves," Zorik said, his voice steady. "We will show you that we are worthy of your aid." Rook gave a single nod, his eyes narrowing. "Good. I'm not interested in playing games. You'll need to survive our tests. Show us that you're capable, that you have the will to fight back. We don't waste our time on lost causes." Kiri stepped forward, her voice filled with conviction. "We will prove that we are not a lost cause. We are Vrothians, and we will not let our people die." Rook gave a short laugh, as if he was amused by Kiri's words, but his expression softened slightly. "We'll see about that." The humans set up camp near the settlement, and the tests began the very next day. The Vrothians were forced to endure harsh survival challenges, pushing their bodies to the limits. They had to survive without technology, without help, and with very little food or water. The humans watched from the sidelines, observing every move the Vrothians made. At first, the tests were brutal. Many of the Vrothians struggled to keep up with the physical demands. But as the days passed, something started to change. The Vrothians, though weak from their hardships, began to adapt. Their bodies grew stronger as they pushed themselves further than they ever had before. And with each passing test, they showed the humans that they were not the helpless species they had once believed themselves to be. Kiri, in particular, began to excel. Her survival instincts kicked in, and she quickly adapted to the harsh conditions. She showed the humans that the Vrothians still had their ancient hunting skills, their ability to endure, and their fierce will to survive. Captain Rook watched closely. He saw something in Kiri and the others, a fire that had been long buried but was now starting to burn brightly again. He knew the Vrothians had potential, and it was becoming clearer with each passing day. The humans weren't here to save the Vrothians out of pity. They had come because they saw something worth fighting for. The days blended into one another as the Vrothians continued their grueling trials. Each day brought new challenges, and each day they pushed themselves harder than ever before. Their bodies, weakened by years of hardship, were now beginning to adapt. The humans observed them closely, never offering help unless it was absolutely necessary. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was a test to see if the Vrothians had the strength, the will to survive. Kiri had quickly become the leader among the Vrothians. She was determined to prove that her people still had what it took to rebuild their world. Each challenge was like a new battle, and Kiri faced them with a fierce determination that inspired those around her. Her sharp eyes and quick thinking allowed her to find solutions others missed. She was becoming stronger with each trial, and the humans had noticed. One morning, the humans led the Vrothians to a remote part of the planet, a place where the natural disasters had left the environment even more hostile than usual. The ground was cracked, jagged, and covered in sharp rocks. There were no plants to be found, no water sources visible. It was as if the land itself was trying to keep them out. "This is your next test," Captain Rook announced, his voice cold and commanding. "Survive for 3 days. There are no supplies. You will have to find food and water on your own. If you fail, you will return to your settlement. Do not expect us to carry you." The Vrothians stood in front of the harsh landscape, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They had faced disasters before, but this was different. This was a test of their very survival. Kiri stepped forward, her voice steady. "We can do this. We will do this. We will survive." Zorik, the elder leader, watched his people with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He had seen the strength in their eyes, but the trials were beginning to take their toll. Their bodies were weary, their minds were tired. Yet he knew that they had no choice but to keep going. As the Varathians set off into the harsh landscape, they quickly realized just how difficult the test would be. The terrain was unforgiving. The air was dry, and there was no sign of water. For hours they walked, searching for anything that could sustain them. The sun beat down on them relentlessly, and soon their bodies began to feel the strain. By the time nightfall came, they had found nothing. No food, no water. Their spirits were beginning to waver. Kiri and Zorik gathered the group together around a small fire, their faces drawn and tired. "We cannot give up," Kiri said, her voice strong despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "We know this planet. We know how to survive. We have survived worse than this. We are Varathians. We will endure." The others nodded, their faces filled with renewed determination. They sat around the fire that night, sharing the little warmth they had left, and tried to find rest, knowing the next day would bring even greater challenges. The next morning, Kiri and the others set off again. This time, Kiri decided to take a different approach. Instead of wandering aimlessly, she focused on the ancient instincts she had learned from the humans. She began to observe the subtle signs of the environment: cracks in the dirt, signs of movement, the direction of the wind. She led the group towards a distant mountain range, where the air was cooler, and the landscape promised more resources. Hours passed, and still there was nothing. But Kiri's determination never faltered. Finally, as the sun began to set, she spotted something: an old, dried-up riverbed. The ground here was cracked, but there were signs that water had once flowed through it. Kiri motioned for the group to stop. "We're close," she said, her voice filled with hope. "We just have to keep looking." They dug into the dry earth, using their hands and whatever tools they could find. It was hard work, but they couldn't give up now. After what seemed like hours, Kiri's hand struck something solid. A rock, but not just any rock. A rock with moisture beneath it. They had found water. With careful hands, they dug deeper, and soon, fresh water began to flow into the small pool they had created. The Varathians drank greedily, their bodies desperate for the life-giving liquid. It was a moment of triumph, a moment of relief. But Kiri knew they couldn't stay there for long. The humans were watching, and they expected results. "We'll rest here for the night," Kiri said. "But tomorrow we continue. We're not done yet." The next day, the Varathians continued their journey, following Kiri's instincts. They used the water they had found to keep them going. And soon, they came across something even more remarkable: wild animals. The creatures were small, but they were alive, and they were food. The Varathians hunted with the precision and skill of their ancient ancestors. They worked together, communicating without words, knowing that their survival depended on each other. By the end of the day, they had enough food to last them for the rest of the trial. When they returned to the human camp after 3 long days, they were exhausted, but they had succeeded. They had found water, food, and had survived against all odds. Captain Rook was waiting for them when they arrived. His expression was unreadable, but when he spoke, there was a hint of approval in his voice. "You've passed the test. You have the skills to survive. I'll give you that." Kiri stood tall, her heart pounding with pride. "We are Varathians. We will endure. We will rebuild." Rook nodded, and for the first time, there was a small smile on his face. "We'll see how you do in the next challenge." The Varathians had proved something important that day. They had shown not only the humans but themselves that they were capable of more than just surviving. They were capable of thriving. The Varathians had completed their first survival trial, and the humans, especially Captain Rook, were impressed. They had shown resilience, resourcefulness, and the will to fight. But the trials were far from over. The humans knew that survival was just the beginning. The real test was whether the Vrothians could adapt, not only to the challenges they faced on their dying planet, but also to the brutal reality of intergalactic survival. After a brief rest, Captain Rook gathered the Vrothians around. His team stood in the background, watching carefully. "You've passed your first test," Rook began. "But now we move on to something more difficult. Survival alone isn't enough. You must learn how to fight, how to defend yourselves. In this galaxy, weakness is not tolerated. You must become strong, or you will be wiped out." Kiri, standing at the front of the group, nodded. She had expected this. The humans weren't interested in helping the Vrothians out of charity. They wanted to see if the Vrothians had the strength to stand on their own, to rise from the ashes of their dying world. "We are ready," Kiri said, her voice steady and confident. "We will not back down." Captain Rook's eyes locked onto hers. "Good. Then we begin." The training was intense, far more difficult than anything the Vrothians had faced before. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about strength, speed, and skill. The humans pushed the Vrothians to their limits, testing them in ways they had never imagined. The first training exercise was a combat drill. The humans, armed with advanced weapons, demonstrated how to fight in a variety of situations: close combat, ambush tactics, and even how to survive a space battle. The Vrothians, though initially hesitant, quickly learned. They had been warriors in their past, skilled in hunting and battle, but the humans taught them techniques that were far beyond anything they had known. Kiri was quick to catch on. She moved with precision, adapting the humans' techniques to her own style of fighting. She sparred with one of the humans, a soldier named Jace, who was one of the best fighters in Rook's team. Jace was tough, his reflexes fast, and his strikes were hard, but Kiri was no slouch. She matched his speed, blocked his blows, and when the opportunity came, she struck back with incredible force. Captain Rook watched with interest, his eyes narrowing as he observed her movements. "Not bad," he said, after the sparring match was over. "You have potential." Kiri nodded, catching her breath. "I've had to fight for everything I have. I will keep pushing. I won't stop." Rook gave her a brief smile. "That's what I want to hear." Over the next several days, the Vrothians were trained in various combat styles, ranged and melee attacks, stealth tactics, and how to think on their feet in the heat of battle. They learned how to use their environment to their advantage, how to track enemies, and how to survive in hostile conditions. With each passing day, their skills grew sharper, their movements more fluid. But it wasn't just physical training that the Vrothians had to endure. There was a mental aspect to it as well. The humans taught them how to stay calm under pressure, how to think strategically in battle, and how to lead others. It was a test of not only their physical endurance, but also their mental fortitude. Zorik, the elder leader, struggled at first. He was older, his body weaker from years of hardship. But he refused to give up. He kept pushing himself, despite the pain and exhaustion. His mind, though older, was sharp, and he quickly grasped the strategic aspects of combat. He might not have been as fast or as strong as the younger Vrothians, but his experience made him a valuable asset. Kiri, on the other hand, thrived in the training. She excelled at everything: the combat, the strategy, and even the leadership. As the days went by, she began to emerge as the true leader of the Vrothians. The humans, seeing her potential, began to trust her more. They began to treat her like one of their own, and she felt herself growing more confident. One day, after a particularly grueling day of training, Kiri and Captain Rook sat down to talk. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. "You've done well," Rook said, his voice gruff but respectful. "You've shown us that you have the skills to survive. But what about your people? Do they have the same will you do?" Kiri looked at him, her eyes determined. "They do. They may be weak now, but they're not lost. I will make sure they're strong again. I won't let them die." Rook nodded. "Good. But remember, survival isn't just about strength. It's about knowing when to fight and when to run. You'll face enemies who are stronger than you, smarter than you, and they won't hesitate to destroy you. But if you can think, if you can strategize, you'll stand a chance. Kiri was silent for a moment, taking in his words. I understand. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for a future where the Vrothians can rebuild, where we can be strong again. Rook's eyes softened just for a moment. Exactly. If you want to survive, you have to fight for your future, and you have to fight with everything you have. Kiri stood up, a new resolve in her eyes. I will fight. I will fight for my people, for my planet, for the future we deserve. As the days passed, the Vrothians continued their training, growing stronger and more skilled with each challenge. They had come a long way from the weak, helpless race they had once been. But they knew they weren't finished yet. The real test still awaited them. Captain Rook watched them closely, his mind already turning to what would come next. The Vrothians had proven they had the will to survive, but the galaxy was a dangerous place, and there were still many threats out there that would stop at nothing to destroy them. But Rook believed in them now. They had shown their strength, and for the first time in a long time, the Vrothians had hope. Their fight for survival had just begun. The Vrothians had come a long way since they began their training with the humans. Their skills had improved, and their confidence had grown. But there was still much to prove. The humans weren't interested in just watching them train. They wanted to see how the Vrothians would perform in a real battle. Captain Rook had made it clear from the beginning that there was no room for weakness. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the Vrothians had to be prepared for anything. It wasn't enough to be strong and skilled. They had to be ready for the brutal reality of combat. One morning, as the Vrothians gathered for their daily drills, Captain Rook appeared with a new set of orders. He was accompanied by several soldiers, all with serious expressions. We've received information about a hostile group nearby, Rook said. They've been attacking settlements, and they're a threat to anyone who gets in their way. It's time for your first real test. You're going to face them. The Vrothians, though nervous, were determined. Kiri, as their leader, stepped forward, her voice steady. We are ready. We won't back down. Rook nodded. You'll be tested in the field. This will not be like anything you faced before. Stay sharp, stay focused, and remember what you've learned. The Vrothians climbed into the human vehicles, and they set off for the location of the enemy group. The journey was tense, each member of the group silently preparing for what lay ahead. The terrain around them was rocky and difficult, but it gave them cover. The Vrothians knew that they would need to rely on their stealth and strategy, as they couldn't afford to make mistakes. As they approached the enemy's last known position, they found signs of recent activity: burned buildings, abandoned vehicles, and the faint sound of voices. The enemy was close. Kiri turned to the group. Stay quiet, she whispered. We need to find out how many there are and where they're hiding. We'll attack only when we know we have the advantage. Zorik, his face grim, nodded. We'll follow your lead. The Vrothians scattered, using the natural cover to move closer to the enemy's camp. They didn't know what kind of weapons the enemy had, but they had to be ready for anything. Kiri's instincts guided them, keeping them in the shadows, out of sight. After what felt like hours of crawling through the rocky terrain, they spotted the enemy. There were 10 of them, armed with heavy rifles and bladed weapons. They were sitting around a campfire, laughing and talking, unaware that the Vrothians were so close. Kiri signaled for the group to move in. This was their chance. They had to strike fast and hard before the enemy had time to react. The Vrothians burst from their hiding spots, charging with surprising speed and precision. Kiri led the charge, her blade cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. The enemy scrambled to grab their weapons, but they were too slow. The Vrothians had already closed the distance. Zorik was at Kiri's side, his old but experienced hands swinging his weapon with powerful strikes. Though he wasn't as fast as the younger Vrothians, he was a force to be reckoned with. He took down 2 of the attackers in a matter of moments, his eyes burning with the fire of survival. The battle was brutal but fast. The enemy wasn't expecting such a quick, coordinated attack. The Vrothians used the environment to their advantage, hiding behind rocks, using the shadows to their benefit, and striking with deadly precision. Kiri fought with the fury of a woman determined to protect her people. Her blade moved like lightning, cutting through the enemy's ranks with ruthless efficiency. She was everywhere at once, dodging, striking, and leading the charge. The humans, watching from a distance, were impressed. They had trained the Vrothians well. The battle didn't last long. Within minutes, the enemy was defeated, and the few survivors flowed into the hills, realizing they were outmatched. Kiri and the others stood over the fallen attackers, their chests heaving as they caught their breath. They had won. Captain Rook approached the group, his face unreadable. "You did well," he said. "Better than I expected." Kiri wiped the sweat from her brow, her voice firm. "We did what we had to do. We protect our people." Rook nodded slowly. "You've proven yourselves in battle. You've learned what it means to fight, not just survive. But remember, this is only the beginning. The galaxy is full of threats far worse than this. What you've learned here, the skills you've gained, they'll keep you alive. But you must continue to grow, continue to learn. You'll face tougher battles ahead." Zorik, standing next to Kiri, looked out over the battlefield. He could see the bodies of the fallen attackers, their weapons scattered across the rocky ground. His mind was heavy with the weight of what they had done. It had been necessary, but it had still been a battle, a reminder of how brutal the galaxy could be. "We're ready for whatever comes next," Kiri said, her voice steady. "We will fight for our future." Kiri sat silently for a moment, taking in Rook's words. She knew what he was saying was true. The Vrothians had no allies, no powerful friends in the galaxy. They were alone, and that made them vulnerable. "We've been alone for too long," Kiri said finally, her voice firm. "But we won't be alone forever. We will find allies. We will fight for what's ours." Rook nodded slowly. "That's the spirit. But be prepared for the challenges ahead. You'll need more than just strength to win. You'll need strategy, alliances, and sometimes a bit of luck." Kiri stood up, her eyes focused on the horizon. "We will do whatever it takes. We will survive." As the days passed, the Vrothians grew stronger. They trained harder, fought more strategically, and learned how to navigate the dangerous galaxy that lay before them. But Kiri knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The enemy they had made was vast and powerful, and the Vrothians would need to be at their very best to defeat them. For the first time, Kiri understood what it meant to be a leader. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about making decisions that would shape the future of her people. She had a responsibility, not just to survive, but to rebuild the Vrothian race. But as the threat of the galaxy loomed larger, Kiri knew that the cost of victory would be high. The road ahead was filled with danger, and she would have to sacrifice more than she ever imagined to protect her people. But no matter the price, she would fight. She would lead, and she would never give up. The day had come. The Vrothians were no longer just survivors. They had been tested in battle, and they had proven their strength. But now, the real challenge was just beginning. Kiri knew that they had to act quickly. The enemy they had made was coming, and they needed to be ready for what was coming next. Their fight for survival had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer just about keeping their people alive. It was about reclaiming their place in the galaxy. Kiri stood before the Vrothian Council, the same group that had once been hesitant and afraid. Now, they were warriors, standing together with a shared purpose. Zorik, ever the wise leader, stood by her side, his face showing the toll of the many battles they had fought together. "We've learned a lot in the past few weeks," Kiri said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We've trained, we've fought, but now it's time to rebuild. It's time to take our future back." Zorik spoke up, his voice low and filled with authority. Kiri is right. We've proven that we can fight, but we have more to do. The enemy we've made is powerful. They will come for us. But we will not run. We will not hide. We will face them head-on. Kiri turned to the group, her gaze unwavering. We will find allies. We will form new alliances. We will strengthen our defenses. We will not be easy targets anymore. The galaxy may think we are weak, but they will learn the truth. We are not to be underestimated. The Vrothians stood tall, their resolve clear. They had fought for their survival, and now they would fight for their future. Later that day, Captain Rook arrived with more news. The atmosphere around him was tense. Kiri could see it in his eyes. Something was about to change. We've located a potential ally, Rook said, but it's not going to be easy. This faction is powerful, and they don't make deals easily. They'll want to see if we're worth their time. Kiri felt a flicker of hope, but she also knew it wasn't going to be as simple as shaking hands and making a deal. Who are they? They call themselves the Aksari, Rook explained. They control a large portion of the galaxy and have a fleet that rivals the best. They're not going to join us just because we ask. We'll have to prove ourselves to them. Zorik frowned. And how do we do that? Rook's expression grew serious. We show them that we're strong. We show them that we have the will to survive and the power to fight. If we can do that, they may help us. Kiri clenched her fists. She knew that this was their chance. If they could get the Aksari on their side, they might finally have a fighting chance against the larger enemy they had made. But there was no room for failure. They had to make it work. The next few days were filled with preparation. The Vrothians worked tirelessly to get ready for their meeting with the Aksari. They sharpened their skills, gathered supplies, and made sure their strategy was sound. Every detail mattered now. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Kiri and Rook led the team as they traveled to the Aksari's stronghold. The journey was long and filled with uncertainty. As they approached the Aksari's planet, the sheer size of their fleet became clear. Hundreds of ships, gleaming in the distance, lined the sky. The Vrothians had never seen anything like it before. They landed on the planet's surface, surrounded by Aksari soldiers who were taller and more imposing than any of the Vrothians had ever seen. They stood at attention, their weapons ready, their eyes studying the newcomers. Kiri, though nervous, held her head high. She would not show fear. Not now. Not when the future of her people was at stake. A tall Aksari leader stepped forward. He was armored from head to toe, his eyes cold and calculating. He spoke in a voice that was both commanding and intimidating. "I am General Kor," he said. "You have come seeking an alliance, but I do not make deals with the weak. Prove to me that you are worthy of my time." Kiri took a step forward, her voice steady. "We are not weak. We've already fought, and we've won. We've survived the hardest trials. Now we ask for your help so that we can protect our future." General Kor's eyes narrowed as he studied Kiri. He was silent for a long moment, and the tension in the air was thick. Then, finally, he spoke. "Very well," he said. "I will give you a chance. We have a test, a challenge. If you pass, we will talk. If you fail, you will leave and never return." Kiri nodded. "We accept." The test was brutal. The Aksari didn't believe in easy victories. They put the Vrothians through a series of challenges: combat trials, intelligence tests, and strategy games. It was the toughest challenge the Vrothians had ever faced, but they pushed through it. Kiri led her people with strength and determination, refusing to let them falter. At the end of it all, General Kor stood before them. His expression was unreadable. "You have passed," he said, his voice low. "You have proven that you are worthy of my attention. The Aksari will ally with you, but know this: if you fail me, I will not hesitate to destroy you." Kiri breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew that their work was far from over. The Aksari might have agreed to help, but their alliance was fragile. They still had to face the larger threat looming in the galaxy. But for the first time in a long time, Kiri felt hope. "We will not fail you," Kiri said, her voice firm. "We will fight for our future." As they left the Aksari's stronghold, Kiri looked at her people. They were exhausted, but they had proven that they were not just survivors. They were warriors, and they would do whatever it took to protect their future. The battle ahead would not be easy, but they were no longer alone. With the Aksari at their side, the Vrothians had a chance to rebuild, to fight, and to finally claim their place in the galaxy.